Welcome to Solve the Story, Book 2, Chapter 10. I am your host, Tyler Attico. I am here today with a guest I've known for a little while now. Someone that I've known for probably almost going on 10 years. A fellow Star Trek author, Mr. Jim Johnson. Jim, how are you doing?
Derek, I was just about to grab my copy of Strange New Worlds 10 to try to remember how long we've known each other. It's 10 plus years, I think.
It definitely is probably 10 plus years.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a while, man. It's been a long time knowing you, which is great.
Absolutely. Great. Yeah, thanks for having me on the show. Really appreciate it.
No, thank you for agreeing to come on. I've wanted you on, but I needed to get the right time to have you on. I thought this would be a really good time to have you on.
Awesome.
Let's just go right into it. There's a lot that I want to cover with you because you have done a lot of things. What I would like to start with, though, is as a writer, as a creative, as an artist, what was that first spark in your youth as a child that made you realize that you wanted to do something either as a writer or was there some other creative spark that you had before writing?
Oh man, that's a great question. I think my first creative spark was probably building stuff with Lego building bricks and very tactile stuff, like doing I remember doing a lot of art and a lot of drawing, but I think I was really drawn to Legos even as like a 5-6 year old or whatever, and just wanting to build stuff. Now, of course, back in the 70s, we didn't have the wealth of pieces and options that are available now, right? We had just, basic blocks and slopes. But I remember just having a lot of fun with that. And then I think it wasn't until like junior high that I started getting the writing bug and started, writing the requisite essays, but then getting into, like, I remember my English teacher really liked me because I was really hungry for more story. Like I was trying to absorb, I was just trying to absorb story in all of its different forms. And I know my mom read to me a lot, and I did my own reading because I just couldn't stop. Like I loved just reading books, right? And I think junior high and then high school is when I really started just trying to put some sort of story down on paper. And I want to thank all the educators out there that really make an effort to get kids interested and excited. Because it was actually my high school career counselor brought me into his office one day, and I didn't know what was going on. Like I thought I was in trouble, but he said, "Hey, I was talking to your history teacher, and you wrote this great essay on Thomas Stonewall Jackson, from the Civil War." And he said,
right.
this is a really good essay. You should do more writing. And for him to actually encourage me to do more writing, I was like, wow, what is this? Because like no teacher was that encouraging for me on anything really. And that kind of carried on, into college. And I just kept doing creative writing. And I was super, super fortunate to have educators who encouraged me to do creative writing or to do more writing. And it just snowballed from there.
Wow. So it's very interesting you said that, because I remember in high school, my English teacher, Miss Tisdale, and she, like, I gave her like a script that I wrote, basically, check for grammar and stuff and all that. Mm-hmm. And she entered it into a contest.
Oh, wow.
Right. You know what I'm saying? So, but it's those first teachers that do those things for us,
mm-hmm.
that start us on that path, man.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So, do you remember like walking away from that conversation and feeling like, is this my thing, or maybe I can do this?
I think especially in college, because the creative writing classes I took in college, I had really amazing professors, and they were like, "Yeah, do more of this." And which is interesting. I had one teacher who was very literary focused, and I was coming in with my genre science fiction fantasy stories, coming in to workshop them, and he was like, "No, you don't want to write that. You want to be writing literary stuff." And I was a little offended by that, because I was like, "But I love science fiction and fantasy. It's what I grew up on. I read a lot of Star Trek novels when I was a kid. I read a lot of Anne McCaffrey and Catherine Kurtz and Dragon Riders of Pern, the Dreeny series.
Right.
And I was like, but this is what I love, right? Why wouldn't I write what I love? And he was like, oh no, you can't make a career out of genre writing. You should be focusing on literary fiction. So he kind of turned me off a little bit, but my other creative writer teachers were like, no, write what you're passionate about and go forward. So I think having educators on both sides of it were really helpful.
If you don't mind me asking, what was your major in college?
Well, being a career part-time student for a long time, I had a number of majors. I started off going into college wanting to be an interpreter because I took a lot of languages in high school. I was fluent in Latin, French, Spanish, and I had a little bit of German. But I've lost it all because I don't use it in day-to-day life. But so I was really good at languages, and I thought I'd go to college and become an interpreter and find some way to do that. But I think over the course of my long career as a part-time student, I gravitated toward English and fiction writing, but I also took a lot of nonfiction writing and editing and proofreading type of courses. And that's what I ultimately got my degree in, was English, / nonfiction writing and editing, and then a minor in history. So all liberal arts.
Right. No, I'm the same way. 'Cause I wanted to go for writing. I couldn't afford like NYU.
Yeah.
I wound up going for law, and then I actually dropped out. Years later, I came back, and then I got an English degree with minor in history.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, that's
cool.
that's really.
I don't think I realized that. I didn't know we had similar paths.
So yeah. That's
pretty cool.
Yeah.
I didn't.
So okay.
Yeah,
so,
I didn't drop out, but it took me 9 years to get my degree. But that's probably the one big thing in life that I'm most proud of, is that I stuck with it. Because there were plenty of times during those 9 years where I was like, I'm just going to give up. I don't need a degree. But I just kept with it. I kept fighting. Even if I could only take one class a semester, based on what was available at the time, I just kept plugging away and forced myself to finish it.
Yeah. No, and that's it's an excellent point and a great message. I dropped out because I had a hip surgery, but still, it's a great message. Don't let go of things. Come back to them. Especially if you have dreams, follow through and finish. Finish things that you start. So that's an excellent point.
Yeah.
I want to go to so you're in college now. You're getting encouragement, and you're getting the right kind of encouragement from professors, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how did you make that transition to start to write, or at least to think that you're going to write professionally? What was that first professional gig?
I think, if I remember right, in my last year of college, one of the writing classes I took was a short story class where we were focused on writing short stories with the intention of submitting them to literary markets, right? I don't even remember, Plowshares, the Atlantic, some of the bigger name. Of course, knowing who are we don't have a shot in getting any of these big markets, but what do we know, right? So, but that was the teacher's intention, was that you write these stories and then you submit them, because that was what you did at the time, right? You put them in you do the proper formatting, and you put them in the envelope with the return envelope and all that. Back when mail was actually still a thing, right? And that went nowhere.
Snail mail,
actual stamp mail, right? With the big envelopes and stuff, right? And of course, got rejected, and that was kind of the expectation, right? Is that your first couple stories are going to get rejected. That there was not a lot of encouragement from that particular professor, other than to say, you write it and send it, which is actually important, right? I think as a younger writer, just the practice of write the story, submit it. That's the job, right? Basically.
Mm-hmm.
And I think somewhere in there, like 97, 98, somewhere in there, that the Strange New Worlds contest came out for Star Trek with Simon and Schuster. And they were like, hey, we're going to do this anthology. If you think you can write a Star Trek story up to 7,500 words and submit it to the editors, we'll look at them, and then they'll take the best 20 or something and submit them. And I didn't hear about the contest until I think you remember Kevin Summers He got a story into Strange New Worlds 4, and he was a friend of mine through theater. And I was like, well, shoot, if Kevin could get a story in, why can't I, right? What did I know? And so by the time I heard about it, though, the submissions for Strange New Worlds 5 had already closed, right? Because it was a year rolling basis or whatever. So I wrote 3 stories for 6. All of those got rejected. And then I wrote 3 stories for 7, and one of those got accepted. And that was life-changing, because I was like, oh, wow, like I wrote a story and some professional editor actually bought it. What in the world is this? And that's what led me to Shore Leave, the convention in Maryland, where a lot of the Star Trek writers went and the Star Trek editors went. And that was like, stars in the eyes kind of experience, because I was like with all these luminaries that I grew up reading, like, Michael Jan Friedman and Howie Weinstein and Keith DeCandido and Dayton Moore, like these big names, right? Right. Oh, you're where I want to be, and to get my foot in the door here, right? And then at those conventions is where I started taking writing classes with AC Crispin, and that was revelatory as well, because back then it was like there was one true path to publishing, because this was even before the Kindle came out, right? This was before Kindle and indie publishing really blew up. So like back then, like the one way to publish was you write short stories, you send the short stories to the markets, right? SF&F, Analog, and Asimov's. Those are the 3 markets. You mail them to those markets, and then you start working on your novel chapters and cover letters, and that was the path to getting published. There was no other way, and that's initially what Anne was teaching us was how to write to submission, right? How to write stuff to get into the markets, and then to get in front of the big name editors at the SyFy publishers, and it just took time. And I think also we got Dean Wesley Smith and Chris Rush were offering classes as well. They're writing workshops, and that was amazing. So I had Chris Rush and Dean Wesley Smith, AC Crispin, and another fantasy sci-fi writer, Holly Lale, did a lot of online workshops too. So like all those people were teaching and learning, and I was learning from all of them. And somewhere, what was it, 2007, I guess, is when the Kindle came out, and that blew the doors off of what was possible with indie publishing, and that changed not to say paradigm, but that changed the rules of how to get published, right? Because you didn't have just one path anymore; you had multiple avenues, and you could do all kinds of stuff. So it's probably
wow, man. No, I mean wow. I'm sorry if you guys hear some of New York going on in the background.
It happens. I remember.
right.
I used to live in New York, but even though I was living on an island in the middle of the harbor, we could still hear the noise every night coming from the city.
You lived on an island in the middle of the harbor?
Yeah, back in the 70s, Governor's Island was a Coast Guard base or a military base. And so from the mid 70s into the early 80s, I lived on the island, which was living in New York City without actually living in New York City, right? Because we had water blocking us from the from the harbor, from the tip of Manhattan. So it was cool. I mean, that's how I started watching Star Trek. Is I had a little 3-inch black and white TV with one of the old aerials on it.
Right.
And if I aimed the aerial just right outside the window, I could get the grainy reruns of Star Trek on the TV. So that was my introduction to Star Trek.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. So okay, so there's a lot to unpack there.
Tons of it, yeah.
I think I might just mute myself. I'm gonna ask the question, then I'll mute myself.
Okay.
Let's talk about what age you were when you first started watching Star Trek, and what was the impact of that for you?
Man, that must have been 7, 8, something like that. Watching reruns of the original series on a little black and white TV, and it was I think it was really inspiring. I mean, I was in a military family, so like the population around me was very diverse. And like all of my school classes in elementary school were very diverse, just because the military was very diverse, and we had all kinds of kids on base. And then I was watching Star Trek, and I was seeing diversity on the screen, right? I was seeing Mr. Spock and Uhura and Chekhov and Sulu, and it was like that was really interesting, because like not only in real life was I seeing a lot of diversity, but I was seeing it on screen too. and that just became the norm, right? That was my worldview of what life was like. Is like we're not all white, we're not all one color, we're not all the same. It was just like this huge diversity of people on screen and in real life, and I think that held on to. I mean, that took hold early on in my life, and I never lost that expectation that life would be really diverse. And it changed a little bit because military families move a lot, and when I moved to Rhode Island for high school, I was in like a little tiny high school with like 300 people, and it was not very diverse. It was like a whole different microcosm of a different world. And then when we moved back to Virginia, I went to George Mason as my college, and that was 20,000 students, right? So I went from a little tiny high school of 300 people to a university of 20,000, and it was totally international. And I was like, oh, this feels right because it's diverse, it's massive, it's more people, and it felt much more comfortable, I think. But yeah, I mean, going back, Star Trek very early, 7, 8 years old, took hold, and I never stopped watching it.
I love that. I love, Star Trek did that for me as well. It was just like, of course, all these people working together, different shades, just makes sense, and for us to get it in those formative years, I think is really a big deal.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, I think it makes a lot of, and I think that's one of the reasons that it has sustained it for so long. All right, so basically you're saying to me that your first pro gig was in Star Trek Strange New Worlds.
Yep.
Right? Yeah. So so that's pretty fantastic, man. That's pretty much how I started too. Which is nuts. And just talk a little bit about, please, how did that feel? I mean, you're getting paid to do something that you love. What do you think that did for you? What do you think that did for this Jim Johnson today?
Well, it gave me my start, right? I mean, everyone's got to start somewhere. So that first story was the first foundational block in whatever I consider my my writing career, and it would be different if I didn't have Strange New Worlds as my starting point, right? I look back on that. So in the days when I'm working and writing and I'm not feeling real confident in myself, right? I can look back on the shelf and say, oh well, shoot, 15, 20 years ago, I managed to write something and get it published. I know I can do this. Like old Jim was able to do this. Current Jim can probably do it too if I just buckle down and get out of my own way, right? Shut down that critical voice and just get into the creative mode. So it's not only was it the foundation, but it's still serving today as a reminder of where I've been and where I can keep going. So I think it's you never forget your first one. I've still got copies. A couple of copies of comp copies sitting around because it's like, oh yeah, I wrote that. It's so cool.
I did that, right.
Every now and then I still find the copy on a shelf in a used bookstore, and I'm like, it's still here. And I face it out, of course, as you do. So yeah, I think it's like where you've been is always as important as where you're going, and never forget your roots, never forget those lessons you learned back then because they're still relevant.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. Let me ask you. I know for myself, since we have a parallel trajectory, I know for myself, after Strange New Worlds 8, I was like, what the heck do I do now? I was like, well, I did this, and now, okay, is it just rinse repeat? I was not really expecting to do anything else ever again in Star Trek. But what else do I do? So I'm very curious to know, what did you do after Star Trek? What was the next thing, and what did you do after that?
Oh yeah, so let's see. So Strange New World, I got stories into 7, 9, and 10, and all during that, like we were doing the shore leave circle or the shore leave circuit every year. And back then, like the editors and the writers from New York would drive down for the weekend, right, and hang out with us. And like Marco and Margaret Clark would do their little presentation where they'd say, here's all the cool stuff coming up over the next year for Star Trek novels. because back then they were doing 2 mass markets a month, right? Because Star Trek was still super popular, and so they were doing 2 mass markets a month plus a bunch of anthologies. And I think I made a nuisance of myself, like constantly badgering them, like, how do I get in? How do I pitch? How do I pitch? How do I get into these anthologies? Because I felt I had a little bit of cred, right? Because I got a couple short stories into Strange New Worlds. And
can I just interrupt you really quick?
Of course.
So for those that don't know, there's a thing among Star Trek Strange New World entries that you can only enter. You can enter as many times as you want, but if you get in and you're accepted, you can only be accepted 3 times.
3 times, yeah.
And when you get in, when you're accepted 3 times, that's it. You kind of like you do in some sense graduate. But you unofficially get what's called the Wardy, because Dayton Ward, who is now who's a phenomenal Star Trek author, he was one of the first individuals to win 3 times at the Star Trek Strange New World.
I think he was the first one.
He was the first, right? To win 3 times in the Star Trek Strange New Worlds contest. So now everyone after him gets the Wardy. I never got a Wardy. You got a Wardy because you got 3 times.
Stuck in right at the end, yeah.
Right, which is pretty dope. So you got the Wardy, so which means that you entered and 3 times you got you got in.
Right.
All right. So now that you got in and you 3 times, now go ahead. I'm sorry. Continue.
No, that's fine. So yeah. So like I said, I was constantly badgering them. Like, how do I pitch for these anthologies? How do I get in? Like, what's the angle to get into possibly working on a novel or something? And I think somewhere in there, like late aughts, they decided, because I think by that point Enterprise was off the air. There were no new movies coming. There were no new series coming. Pocketbooks, Simon & Schuster decided to cut back from 2 mass markets a month to 1 mass market a month, and that meant that the ability for them to take a chance on newer writers, in addition to using the experienced veterans like Dayton and Keith DeCanado and stuff, it changed like almost immediately once they cut the schedule. So I was like, oh shoot, because I know I had sent a lot of novel pitches to Marco and just couldn't get any of them to stick. But he did invite me to write a short novella for one of the Mirror Universe anthologies. He said, hey, I'm working on this anthology. I want to do a story with Mirror Universe Keiko. Would you be interested? And I was like, yeah, sign me up. So, I was able to do that, based on the strength of the Strange New World stories. But after that, it was pretty clear that Star Trek fiction had kind of not dried up, but like the opportunities just weren't there. Because I was still a fairly raw. It shifted, yeah, because I was still a fairly raw writer, and I just could not get a good novel pitch past the editors to make it work. So I had to shift to something else. And I think weirdly, going to those conventions and seeing how hard like Keith and Dayton and some of the other tie-in writers were working to hustle to find more IPs to work on and find more gigs to work on.
Absolutely.
It was hard just to see what they were doing and to think like, do I want to do that? Like, can I go learn Stargate in a couple of weeks and feel confident enough to start pitching novels? Like, can I learn an IP in a very short period of time in order to confidently write a novel? And I didn't think I could do that. And about the same time, I was starting to get into the RPG side of things and working on some RPGs. Like Decipher had the license to the Lord of the Rings RPG at the time. And so I got into that as a freelancer and did some writing on that. And that kind of shifted me. So I was kind of bouncing back and forth between fiction and RPG writing. But I was still writing short stories and submitting them to the markets, still, as you do. So I got a bunch of rejections from, Analog and Asimov's and fantasy and science fiction and 1 or 2 other markets that were out there at the time. I don't remember offhand what they were. But I think I was kind of bummed out about it, right? Because I really wanted to write more Star Trek, but there just was not an avenue to do it because Simon & Schuster was the only licensee at the time that had the ability to do Star Trek fiction at any length. I don't think the Star Trek Fan Club magazine at the time was publishing fiction. So there was just the one market, and like if you couldn't get into that, then
that's it, right?
Find something else to do, right? Because if you want to write, you got to find something else to do, right? Because that opportunity just wasn't there.
So yeah, I it's funny for me because I didn't know really any of that. I just knew, I figured I was one and done, you
Hmm.
know. So I was like, all right, I and I knew I didn't know a lot about the business of
Yeah.
of writing or publishing. So I kind of took like a little hiatus and just started to like try to learn the business,
Hmm.
And then when Star Trek Strange New Worlds contest came back around in 2016, I hadn't had a lot under me in regards to publication. So I submitted again and got in. So that was
Hmm.
great.
Yeah.
Um, um, Let me ask you though. You mentioned that you were starting to kind of dabble professionally into RPGs, but that was professionally. Was that your only interactions with RPGs, or did you have a relationship with RPGs just personally
Hmm.
before that?
Oh yeah, totally. I think in junior high and high school, that's when Dungeons and Dragons came out, right? The old AD&D box sets, like the red box is the one I remember. The coming that must have been 85.
Oh, you're gonna date yourself. You don't want to do
Well,
that.
it is what it is. But yeah, that was a long time ago. So I played role playing games all through high school, and then all through
Sure.
college, and then onward. So I'd been an avid gamer for most of my you know adolescent/adult life, and
So,
like a lot of story came out of that because it's all character building and world building and creative collaborative storytelling with your group and your friends. And
is that what it does for you? Is it just the storytelling, or is there anything else that role playing games do for you personally?
oh gosh, there's so much. I mean, in fact, I recently got to get my first academic writing credit, writing an essay on how RPGs build leadership skills, or can build leadership skills, especially a Star Trek RPG.
Right.
And I think
Is that the same thing that we're in?
yeah, you're in that, aren't you?
Yeah, you're in that. Yeah, right. Well, you got me that
Copy.
invitation, man, to get in that. So yeah. Thank you for that.
Man.
Yeah, I
Anyway, so
appreciate
yeah,
that.
my essay is about how RPGs help build leadership skills, and I think absolutely looking back on my life as a gamer,
Right.
the world building, the storytelling, the writing, the character building, but also the soft leadership skills, like all that stuff is in there, especially because so many of the RPGs that I played were Star Trek, whether it was FASA or Decipher or Last Unicorn Games or the homebrews that my group and I made, because we discovered that most of the like officially published RPGs were not quite working for the way we wanted to play the game, right? We wanted it to be more, we wanted our Star Trek games to feel more like a Star Trek episode, right? We wanted to be more cinematic, more action oriented, more scene, subplot, character growth, character stuff weaving in. And we weren't really into the hard mechanics of like dice rolling and that. We wanted to tell the story. We didn't want to play the game, I guess, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so absolutely all of that gaming experience totally dovetailed with the writing and like the process of writing and developing stories and worlds and especially characters and dialogue.
So can we take this opportunity to talk a little bit about theater of the mind?
Yeah.
Because that's crucial for any RPG,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's kind of this thing that you kind of have to agree to and kind of like it's a cumulative thing. Can you I know I can kind of talk about it, but can you from your perspective talk about how you see what theater of the mind is, please?
Yeah, so theater of the mind in a RPG context, I mean, I guess even a writing context, is you're just getting into that headspace where you're imagining the world and you can see the world and you can see the characters and you can just see everything that's happening. And in an RPG anyway, with a collaborative storytelling environment, you and your fellow players are all on the same wavelength, right? You've had your conversation ahead of time, you've set the ground rules, you know what you want to accomplish together, and then you just start weaving that story together. And you're not relying on a map, you're not relying on miniatures, you're not relying on like zones of combat or 5-foot steps or whatever. You're just making stuff up in the moment. The game master or the narrator or whatever is setting the scene, right? They're giving you enough sensory details so that you can kind of picture where your characters are. And then as fellow players and narrativists, you're adding your elements and details to it. So collectively, you're weaving the story together. And I remember the groups I played with in person, but also the groups I played with online. It was almost like we were just kind of like creating our own audio drama, right? Because we were just relying on what we were imagining in our heads, as opposed to what was on the table in front of us. And I think as writers, we do the same thing, right? Because as we are writing, we are trying to put the pictures in our heads into words so that a reader sees the same picture that we're imagining, right? It's almost like magic, or it's almost like brain control, right? I think Dean Wesley Smith even talks about this in one of his classes. Is like you are trying to control the reader's brain by forcing a picture into their mind that you've created in your head. Like if you make that connection correctly through your words, they are seeing what you see, and they are feeling what you want them to feel, right? That's the ultimate goal as a writer, is like you want that reader to feel something from what they're reading from you. And if you can get the code right, you can control their mind and get them to feel exactly what you want them to feel. And I think that's just an amazing, powerful thing to do. And when it works right in an RPG kind of situation, it's just magic, because you can just sit back and just see the thing that's being created with the collaborative group together.
Yes, you're right. That's interesting. I've always thought about it similarly, that as a writer, we're guiding and we're painting a picture, and we're definitely narrating and taking the reader on this journey and painting this picture for them. And in role playing, it's very much the same. With the GM painting the picture and taking the players along on that journey, and having these guardrails for those players along that journey, along that adventure. And I think the best writer, the best novel, and the best role playing game do that in a way that doesn't interfere with the reader's imagination or the player's adventure, right?
Absolutely.
So yeah. All right, so we've established theater of the mind, right? So now let's go back, and you're starting to are you starting now to get gigs on the professional side in RPGs?
Yeah. So my first professional gigs were with Decipher, because I was working on the Lord of the Rings RPG right about when the movies were coming out. So it was hot at the time. But I started off just writing fan content because I love the game, I love the setting, I love Tolkien, and I was like, this is a really cool game. And I'm just gonna do fan stuff for it, and just throw the fan event, put the adventures and the characters and stuff online, just so that the other fans can enjoy it. And the line manager of the Lord of the Rings game noticed that, and I caught his eye, and he was like, well, do you want to write for the game, right? Do you want to do some writing for the game? And I was like, oh, of course. I got I had the Strange New Worlds stories. I had a little bit of professional credibility, not a lot, but you got to start somewhere. And then I did a bunch of stuff for them. A lot of it didn't get published though, because Decipher collapsed shortly after that. So there was a lot of stuff that I wrote that just didn't get published, and that's just unfortunately that's kind of the nature of the beast in the RPG industry. Is a lot of stuff gets developed and worked on and then just doesn't get published. Like I did a lot of writing. One of the gigs I got was to work on the so there's a game called Eve Online. It's a science fiction, spaceships and economy and all kinds of stuff. There was going to be
looks great.
Yeah, it looks fantastic. It's I think it's if it's not Iceland, it's a Scandinavian company. And so the colors are very different, right? It's just a really cool color palette in that game. But we were going to, there was a company that was going to do an Eve RPG, and I wrote a ton of content for that. And unfortunately, it'll never get published, which is too bad, because there was some really cool stuff in that game. But I did some other work for other game companies, and so I was kind of splitting my time between fiction and RPGs, and then just the professional life, because you got to work. You got to work to pay the bills until the writing takes off. And then those gigs just kind of continue. I was more of a dabbler in RPGs because partly because of what I learned from Keith and Dayton and stuff, is that I didn't want to get into the headspace of constantly having to chase down gigs, right? and I didn't
Right.
want to have. I couldn't see myself doing that kind of a career, and it wasn't because I'm lazy, although I am a little lazy, but it's like I just don't have the brain capacity to learn Stargate and to learn Superman and to learn this and to learn that, like to learn all these little discrete properties enough to feel confident to go write for it. Like the passion's not there, and I always felt that my writing is stronger when I'm passionate about whatever it is I'm writing. Like the stuff I wrote for the Lord of the Rings game and the Star Trek stories I wrote. There's so much more passion and connection for me to those, as opposed to the stuff I wrote little one-offs here and there, because I just didn't know the game that well. But I was invited to work on it, and I was like, I think I can write this confidently, but it's not, but I wasn't passionate about it, right? And I think that's been my big challenge. Is like I look at Keith DeCandido, and like he can be passionate about everything. He's just
Everything.
He's a very
We
passionate.
know no Keith, right? Everything.
And,
but that's honest, man. I think that's honest. You're saying, hey, look, if I don't feel I can give 100%, and have that passion. Not that I can't give 100%, but if I can't give that passion, then I'm not going to do that. And I think that's honest. So okay, putting that aside for a second.
Yeah.
Let me ask you about your own material then. Right? Because we've been talking a lot about licensed material.
Right.
So now what about your own material? What have you done in regards to your own material? Because now we're talking about passion, right? So your own material is going to be passionate. So talk to us about your own material.
Yeah, so wrote a lot of short stories and sent them off to the markets. It was mostly fantasy. I think I like writing space opera and Star Trek, and a little bit of Star Wars, but I never had the sciences and I never had the math. And this goes back to educators. I never had educators who were particularly encouraging in terms of math or science. And no knock on them necessarily. That's just the teachers they were, and maybe I just wasn't responding to what they were giving out, but. I did not have a passion for science or for math going all through school. I always leaned toward the liberal arts. And so like hard science fiction just never connected for me. I tried reading a lot of the classics, right? Especially when I was working at Walden Books. I tried to read a lot of the classic science fiction, like the hard science fiction, and I just bounced off it. I was happier in the fantasy worlds and the light space opera type of stuff. And so that's what I gravitated to as a writer. And I think once the Kindle came out and indie publishing really became a thing, it took me a few years to realize that the old received wisdom of you must write short stories and submit them to the markets and then write sample chapters and send them to the editors and agents, that didn't have to be the only way anymore, right?
That model, right.
You could just write something and publish it and like see if you find a market for it. Like who knows, right? And at the time, I had taken a writing class from Holly Lale, a fantasy writer, really good fantasy writer, and one of her ideas was take a whole bunch of index cards and write down on each index card something you're passionate about, right? And like so until you got like a big stack of them. So I was like, I did this exercise. It was like, okay, I'm really passionate about history, ancient Egypt, cats, humor, music, diversity, inclusion, all these different topics and things that I'm into, right? And then you shuffle all those cards together, and then you just grab a couple random cards and just see what happens, right? And that day, one day, I picked up the two cards I drew were ancient Egypt and Westerns. Right? I was like, okay, ancient Egypt and Westerns. How can I combine those two passions? And that's what led me to write my series called Pistols and Pyramids. It's a secondary world of taking ancient Egypt and kind of moving it up into the the steam, not steampunk, but like steam engines, pistols, weapons, that kind of
That's
thing.
a hell of a name, Jim. Pistols and Pyramids. Did you guys hear that? Pistols and Pyramids. That's a movie right there, yo.
Oh, thanks.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And so I was so passionate about that idea that in the space of about 4 months, in like a white hot heat, I wrote 3 like 35,000 word novellas. They're not even short novels; they're novellas because it wasn't quite long enough to be a novel. But I wrote 3 of them, like 3 in a row, boom, boom, boom. Super passionate about it, and then I got an editor to clean them up, and then I published them. I published them as ebooks on Kindle, and then I had Kevin Summers actually did the formatting for me, the internal page formatting, and Kevin had a comic book artist do some comic art for one of his books, and I reached out to that artist, James Hale, and I said, "Hey, can I commission just a few like little one picture, one frame vignettes, and I'm going to put them in my books for this weird western, Pistols and Pyramids, a weird western." And so the books I published have a hand drawn map by yours truly, because of course it's a fantasy. So you gotta have your hand-drawn map in there of a secondary world, kind of Egypt, and then I dropped in these handful of art illustrations I had done as well, and I didn't sell many copies, but I didn't care, because it was like, this is my start. I'm learning how to self-publish and indie publish as I'm going, and I was super passionate about those characters. So I got those first 3 books out, and then I combined the 3 books together into an omnibus, and I published the omnibus as well. And that was just so much fun, just to get into that creative headspace. And I mean, because you're a writer too, like, that flow state when you get into it, and you're just, the words are coming, and then years later you'll pick it up and you're like, who wrote this? Like, I don't know, I don't remember what happened, right? And I think I ran into that because after that I was getting a little bit smarter about indie publishing, and I was like, well, I got this idea for an urban fantasy series. And I wanted to set that urban fantasy series where I live, because, write what you know, but also because I live here in the Northern Virginia area, just outside of DC. There's just so much stuff here that had story potential. And I was like, okay, I'm going to pivot away from the weird westerns a little bit, just to take a break. And I was really passionate about this idea I had for the urban fantasy series. And that was right about the time my son was born. Mm-hmm. And I had 6 weeks of FMLA, family medical leave back, where I could stay home and help take care of the newborn and my partner, just to get some time off, and just to get that whole thing started. But I found I had a lot of time. Right? I had a lot of time on my hands, because in between taking care of them, I was up at all kinds of weird hours of the night, right? Taking care of the baby and taking care of my partner, and just living. So in every spare moment I had, because I'm a sprint writer, right? I write in 30-minute sprints. Like, anytime I could find to grab 30 minutes and just heads down, hyper focus on a sprint, I would just bang out as much as I could. So I think I wrote those 3, and those were full-length novels. The first one was like 110,000 words, and then 90,000, and the last one was only like 82 or something. So I wrote that trilogy of urban fantasies books in about 4 months, 5 months, something like that. It was really compressed, because like, again, I was white hot heat in the moment of it, really just in the flow state. And of course, got an editor to help me on the back end, because tip for writers out there: every writer needs an editor. Every writer needs an editor. Yes, this is what like self-editing is great. I believe in self-editing, and there's techniques to do it. But you still got to have somebody. You got to have at least a proofreader look at your stuff, just because you're gonna miss it. Like, no matter how many times you look at it, how many different ways you look at it, if you listen to it, if you have somebody read it to you, you're still gonna miss stuff. So please get somebody to look at your stuff. Beg, barter, or borrow, or like whatever you need to do. There's ways to get somebody else to look at your stuff without having to pay a lot of money. But anyway, that being aside, so yeah.
Let me ask you a quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
When you write, what do you think is at the core or at the soul of your story, of Jim's story, every time he writes? What is Jim saying or trying to say every time he writes? What do you think?
Gosh, Derek, that's a great question. I think sometimes I go into writing a short story or a book with a specific question in my head that I want to explore over the course of the story or over the course of the book. Sometimes I know I'm exploring something, but I'm not quite sure what it is until I go back and read the finished draft and go, oh, that's what I was trying to work out. And then I'll refine it a little bit in editing. Or in the case of the Pistols and Pyramids books, like, I had no idea what I was doing other than just trying to tell a cool story, set in an ancient Egypt analog with magic and pistols. But I think, all those values that I learned from Star Trek as a kid, diversity, inclusion, everyone's equal. You can have strong women right up against strong men. Everybody's got an equal chance. I think all that stuff is super important to me, to the point where it's just like that's in my DNA. Like I don't think outside that, because it's just where I've been and where I am. I think all that percolates into my stuff. I mean, we were the Star Wars generation, right? So we grew up with Princess Leia being a very strong woman in a gigantic rebellion full of guys. Like she was the only she was the only woman until Mon Mothma came along. So like we had Uhura and we had Princess Leia. Those were the two big role models for me. From women role models. I'm plus Wilma Deering and Wonder Woman Linda Carter. And
right. That's right.
A lot of really strong women characters back in the 70s. Again, dating myself, but it is what it is.
That's right. I was just.
So I think the soul of my story is like, we're all equal and we've all got our stories to tell and we all have equal opportunities to do stuff. So let's just tell stories that we're not hearing, right? Like, there's been plenty of stories about strong white men, and there are other stories that can be told. And
there are plenty of stories out there that can and should be told. Is absolutely right.
Need to be told. Yeah,
that's true. Right. Thank you for saying that, Jim. Let's talk about Star Trek Adventures. We've talked a lot about you. I think what's very interesting is how a lot of what you've done has kind of led and even in some ways pivoted to you being where you are specifically for Star Trek Adventures. So can you talk about how you got the gig for Star Trek Adventures? And as you're talking about that, Yvette, can you pull up the PowerPoint for Star Trek Adventures?
Oh yeah, there you go. So there we are. That's the cover of the second edition core rulebook, and I think you can see just by looking at it, that's Star Trek IDIC, infinite diversity, infinite combinations in action, right? You got a very diverse group of aliens, genders, and characters there, even a diversity of uniforms, right? Because we tried to show that, especially second edition, is all Star Trek. It's not just next gen. It's not just original series. It's not just Enterprise. You can play any era with the second edition of the game. You can do it with first edition too, but when first edition came out in 2017, it was we very intentionally focused it more toward the next generation DS9 Voyager kind of look and feel. We used the LCARS design for the pages, and over the life of the game, we realized that all these new series coming in, Discovery and Strange New Worlds and Picard and stuff, there's a bigger tapestry that we can play with, and there's a whole new generation of Star Trek fans coming into Star Trek that aren't familiar with the old stuff, but they are familiar with the new stuff. So that's what kind of led us to developing second edition, and really bringing that stronger sense of diversity into it. But in answer to your question about how I got started, in 2016, a good professional friend of mine, Jason Dural, he's done a lot of stuff professionally in the RPG space. He was also a freelancer on the Lord of the Rings RPG with me back in the day with Decipher, and he was working with a company called Modiphius Entertainment. He was working on the Conan RPG at the time, and one day he reached out to me and said, "Hey Jim, I work with Modiphius on the Conan RPG, and I just found out that Modiphius got the rights to a new RPG for a new IP. I can't tell you what the IP is because you're not under NDA yet. So, but I think you should send your resume to the president."
I think you should.
Modiphius, and he signed off the email with "Live long and prosper." And I was like, "Oh, I think he's giving me a hint." So I immediately sent my stuff off to Chris at Modiphius, and he was like, "Yeah, we need all the help we can get." And
Nice.
I rapidly got into working on the first edition core book as a writer, and because of Shore Leave, I had relationships with Dayton Ward and Scott Pearson and Keith DeCandido and like all these professional Star Trek writers. And I reached out to some of them and said, "Hey, I'm working on this new Star Trek RPG. Do you want to come along? And can I put your name in to talk to them about it?" And fortunately, they all said yes. Whether they're happy about that or not, they all said yes. And so Chris, the president of Modiphius, was like, "Okay, well, Dayton and Scott, let's commission you guys to develop an idea for a living campaign where we were going to do like a whole series of adventures based on the on whatever the idea they came up with." And the stuff that they came up with was like the foundation of what became the Shackleton Expanse. And I know you're familiar because you worked on the book with me for the Shackleton Expanse. And so, but having Dayton and Scott on the team early on really helped us with the Paramount licensors, because of course it's the same licensing team reviewing the Simon and Schuster books that are reviewing the game stuff and like everything else Star Trek. So like just seeing the fact that we were pulling in well-known, Star Trek names really kind of helped give them the confidence that we knew what we were doing, by virtue of me having known them from conventions, right? So I was able to pull them along and immediately elevate the game without just, even having any product yet or any.
That's smart, man. That's great.
It just worked out.
Greg, can we go back to that and see the second slide?
Yeah, it was just lucky. It was just lucky timing and lucky that they came along. So yeah, that's a map.
Yeah,
that's the Alpha and Beta Quadrant. This is a map pulled right out of the Strange New Worlds graphics team provided this for us, so that we could include it in the second edition core book. So this is actually, you saw this on screen at one point. We added a very minor embellishment. We on the right hand side we added the Shackleton Expanse, because the Expanse is in the Beta Quadrant, and that was a little chunk of the Beta Quadrant that Paramount let us play with, because our stuff is not canon, and they weren't worried about us impinging on anything that the production teams were working on. So we got to play in a little corner of the Star Trek galaxy, which was really, really cool. So that was a lot of fun.
Can we go to the next slide?
Yep. So for second edition, we decided to create kind of a iconic cast of characters. That's the characters you see on the cover. And then we repeat those characters in assorted pieces of art throughout the books for second edition, just to provide kind of touchstones for readers. We also have certain iconic characters introduce each chapter. So there's a little sidebar for each chapter that in one of the characters' voices, just kind of like talking about the topic and trying to ease readers into what they're looking at. So this is just a cool piece of art with the away team here checking out a cave and some minerals and stuff. Just trying to show you like the diversity of the crew. You got a Tellarite, an Andorian, some humans. There's a Trill in the background. Different departments, different colors. We went with the Strange New Worlds kind of uniform aesthetic for this particular piece, partly because Strange New Worlds at the time was the main show on the air, and why not tie into that, because it's super popular. And it felt like a good place to kind of set this piece of art. Right.
Can we go to the next slide, please?
And this is just some of the material. This is actually from the this is just some of the talking about Starfleet and like what are long duration missions, what are quarters. Just a couple of pieces of art. One in the lower deck style, because we do have the ability to pull on content from all of the series and movies right now. We wanted to show just an example of the diversity in action, right? Like Star Trek is so broad and can fit every possible genre. You could do a realistic kind of story like in the lower left, where you've got the crew in a cafeteria, chatting, having a good time. Or you could do a more broad humor kind of thing with lower decks, and there's a group of officers chatting up in the lower deck style corridor.
I think what you've done, you, Jim, specifically, and the writers, and everyone at Modiphius, is create the most immersive Star Trek experience outside of like watching a show. And I know that not just from working on it and writing it, but from playing it. It's just very, very, very immersive. And it's another thing that I want to touch on. That you've done that is kind of something that Star Trek has done throughout the years, where I guess it started. I don't know if it was done on TOS, but I know it was done on Next Generation, bringing in writers that were or individuals that weren't necessarily officially writers, and that kind of the history of that has been passed forward, and I want to know if you could speak a little bit about that, because you do that as well with Star Trek Adventures. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you, if I remember right, talking to you at Shore Leaves and stuff. I can't remember, Derek, did you do some of the script submissions when they were open back in?
You texted me on my birthday, and I got a text from you. It was actually my birthday. I mean, you didn't know it was my birthday, but it was my birthday. And you texted me and you were like, hey man, I know, a long time, that kind of thing. And I'm working on this. This is what I'm doing. This is what I'm working on. And I'd like to know if you'd be interested in submitting for Star Trek Adventures. And I was like, what the heck? It's my birthday. Yeah, this guy doesn't know that. Heck yeah, I'd be interested, So that was very, very cool. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And it didn't mean that I would get in, but it meant that I had the opportunity to submit, and so I appreciated that. And so can you talk a little bit about
the genesis of that? So like again, dating myself, whatever. Back in the day when Next Gen and when Next Generation was on the air, Paramount was one of the very few, if not the only studio in Hollywood that was opening the doors to spec scripts. Like if you were a writer anywhere out there in the universe and you thought you could write a script for television, they wanted you to write a script on spec, speculation. No promises of buying it or anything. You would write a script and you would mail it. Like they had a phone number you could call, and Lolita Fatjo was a script coordinator, and she had a recording and said, okay, send your script to such and such address, and it'll go into the pile. And the interns working on Next Gen at the time would have the duty of reading all these scripts, and they would read those scripts, and they would, like, if something caught their eye, they would invite those writers in to pitch, right? And you'd have pitch sessions in front of the producers and the writing team. But anyway, so Paramount, I think, was the first one that did that, and what they were doing intentionally was opening it up to the fans and saying, hey, we need because we got this big series, we got 26 episodes a season we got to fill, and our writers can only do so much. So they were always constantly looking for ideas. I mean, they may not buy the script, they might buy the story, they might buy you just to say, hey, you got some good ideas, pitch more ideas, right? Anyway, so that concept carried over from Next Generation to DS9 to Voyager. And in fact, on the shelf back here behind me, I'm not going to pull it down because we don't have time. There's a Making of Deep Space Nine written by Judy and Garfield Reeves Stevens. It's a fantastic book.
Really is.
All about the sausage making that goes into making a television series, and in specific, the sausage making that went into making DS9. And in fact, in the back of that book, there's like 6 pages saying, here's how to write a spec script for DS9, and here's how to mail it to us. Here's the mailing address, etc. Right? So Star Trek as a entity has a tradition. There you go buy it. You can find a copy at used bookstores for like next to nothing. It's easy to find. It's long out of print, but it's easy to find. It's such a warehouse of detail and idea, especially about DS9. I know you love DS9. I love DS9. Everybody should love DS9.
Right, of course.
But anyway, so I grew up on this, right? Like as a professional-minded writer, like I grew up on that idea that, okay, Star Trek is open to everybody to at least get a chance, right? They're giving you a shot. Shoot your shot, right? Like take the chance, willing to do it. I sent in one spec script for Next Gen. It went nowhere, but that's okay because like at least I knew I had the chance to try, right? And
absolutely.
I held on to that. I mean, I never knew what I was going to do with it, right? I just had that concept in my head that Star Trek was open to everybody to submit. Okay. And then just through the years of working on Star Trek Adventures, I eventually became the line manager. When the existing line manager moved on to another role in the company, that left a gap. And I was like, well, I've kind of been doing a lot, helping, get things moving along. So I think I got you've taught me how to be a project manager over the last several years. Just give me the work and let me see what I can do with it. So they made me the project manager, and I was like, okay, now I'm in a position where I can invite that. Now all of a sudden I'm not a writer anymore. I'm not just the editor. I'm now an acquisitions editor, right? Effectively, I can now reach out to people and say, hey, I need more adventures. I need more sections of books written. I think you could do it. I think you could do it. I think you could do it. And I opened up to pitches, right? I said, hey, if you think you can write a Star Trek Adventures adventure, send me your ideas, send me your pitches, send me your ideas. And all of a sudden I became Dean, right? Like, so
right.
Dean was taking all those stories every year and reading the best ones. I'm now taking pitches and reading the pitches. And In some cases, there was instant rejects because it just didn't fit. Either it didn't fit the line, or you can tell at a glance if it was competently written or not. I mean, you can just kind of tell as you get into it. You start learning what works and what doesn't work. And
you're still doing that.
I'm still doing it, yeah. And what I discovered is that I was in a position where I could give people opportunities, like I got opportunities when I was first starting out. So I'm kind of like, pulling people up and paying it forward to say, like, this is how I got started. Someone giving me a chance. Now here I am in a place where I can give someone else a chance, and it is probably the highlight of my professional career to realize that there are people now who are getting success as professional RPG designers and developers, and they got their start from me on Star Trek Adventures. I mean, like, I can't put a value on that other than just to say that's amazing to see that trajectory that they're on. Like Al Spader and Troy Mepians and Aaron Pollier in particular have done a lot of work on Star Trek Adventures, and they've gone on to create their own games and their own RPGs and their own stuff, and like it's just blossoming like a tree that's flowered, and it's like I'm seeing all these
branching
flowers
out right
all over the place. It's like, oh shoot, I did that. How did that happen? And I'm still doing it, and it's so rewarding when people say, oh yeah, I got my start on Star Trek Adventures, and now I'm doing this cool thing over here. And I'm like, and they even come back to me and they say, hey Jim, would you write a foreword for my book or something? I'm like, what are you asking me for? Like,
right.
It's crazy.
The adventure continues.
It never ends. Yeah, it constantly continues. And I didn't expect that 9 years ago when I started working on the line, because I was just a writer, right?
9 years.
But to be in that position to carry on that Star Trek tradition of giving somebody a chance is really important to me, because I mean, everybody deserves an opportunity, right? And if I'm in a position where I can give any number of people an opportunity to write for a franchise they love, that's a win, man. And in fact, at the height of first edition, when we were doing a lot of PDF adventures and stuff, I think it dawned on me that Star Trek Adventures at the time was the only market for Star Trek writing where you didn't need an agent, right? Like if you wanted to write a novel,
right? That's right.
If you wanted to write for Enterprise or for any of the movies where you needed an agent to get in that way.
That's right.
And it just worked out. Yeah.
We will put your I mean, if it's all right with you, because I think you have like an email specifically for that. Is that correct?
Yeah, you can just email me anytime at jim@modiphius.com. That's modiphius.com. If you go anywhere online that the game is talked about, there's a fan-run Facebook group, there's a fan-run subreddit, there's the official Modiphius Discord. I'm on social media all over the place for the game constantly. I love engaging with the fans and getting their feedback and helping out where I can, and just chatting with the fans, because I'm a Star Trek super fan too. And I love to geek out with everybody online. Yeah. So if you don't email me directly, you can just find me on Discord and just chat with me that way. I don't like second edition is a slightly different entity than first edition was, so we don't have quite the same number of opportunities that we did in the first edition. But I'm always looking for new writers. And in fact, the new book that just came out that's on pre-order now, the 23rd Century Source book, I think I've got 2 new writers in there. Because I'm always trying to find opportunities to write like little sidebars or little sections of text here and there, because Star Trek is founded on diversity and having multiple voices being stronger than one voice. I always try to have like 10 or 12 writers on each book, and even though that creates more logistical work for me as a project manager, all the paperwork and invoices and all that crap, I gotta have more voices in the book, because that just makes the book stronger. And I mean, just in the weeds about RPGs, I know some companies like to have one person writing their supplements. Like you have a supplement and it's written by one or 2 people. That's fine, but I like having a lot of voices in the book, telling different pieces of things, because it makes it feel more, I don't know, more real or more connected.
Well, variety and diversity is literally the spice of life.
It's the foundation of Star Trek. Absolutely,
and it's the foundation of Star Trek, in infinite diversity in infinite combinations. Jim Johnson, Thank you. This has been, I learned things about you that I actually did not know. So that's been great. I thought I knew a lot. I was like, oh, well, I know a lot of these. I did not. So
Derek, everybody's, and I learned some stuff about you that I didn't realize. Right? I think
right?
it's just a reminder that not to be silly about it, but everybody's an onion, right? And you just peel back the layers, and there's always more layers to find, and there's never enough time to talk about everything. But I can't believe we've gone through the evening so quickly. So, and thanks to all the fans. Like I'm not able to join the chat for some reason, but I'm watching your chat, and I'm happy to see all the comments. So I'm just glad that people are excited and curious, and I hope you do check it out. Check out the game, and then if it inspires you, play it or just get into Star Trek or whatever. But I'm really excited to have been here, Derek. So thank you so much for inviting me. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you. And I will say that I've been fortunate enough to write for Star Trek Adventures, but I've played it. And anyone that loves Star Trek, it's very easy. Don't be afraid. Don't be like, oh, it's so much rules. It's very easy to jump in. You get the core rule book, and it's very easy to jump in. And Jim is very hands-on and easy and accessible on social media, so you can ask him questions and stuff. So yeah, it's a really fun game. It's a really fun game. It's very Star Trek. It's really weird how much STA feels like Star Trek. I'm not just saying that, but having been on both sides of it, I can tell you it's very much Star Trek. So Jim, thanks for the conversation. It's been a lot of fun. Thank you for being here. And before we leave, I want to talk a little bit about a friend of mine, a friend of ours. But before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about a little bit of trivia. I had a trivia question that I wanted to ask Sabrina, and I kept saying to myself, "Oh, I got to ask Sabrina this trivia question. I got to ask this trivia question." I kept putting it off. And I never got the opportunity to ask her. So I wanted to ask Sabrina, how did people, and when did people start calling actors stars and superstars and stars? Where did that happen? And I knew if there was anyone to ask, it would be Sabrina, right? Mm-hmm. Right? We all know that, right? Sabrina would know. And so now I can't ask her. So I said, well, okay, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do the work, and I'm gonna find out my damn self. And the word star was reportedly one of the first times the word star was used. It was used in the 19th century to refer to a leading stage actor. And the term was, of course, common. It was common in the music hall era. Mm-hmm. But the first recorded use of the word star was for an entertainer way back around 1779.
Wow.
Okay. Right? That's nuts, right? And it was used to describe, it was believed to be used to describe the actor David Garrick. Now, if we were having this conversation with Sabrina, I'm sure she would go into David Garrick and who that is and all of that, but I will not do that. But I will say the reason that term stuck was because stars shine brightly. And they shine brightly because they demand attention because of their power, and because no matter how far away they are, you can't help but see them. They defy being ignored. You cannot ignore them. Mm-hmm. And not only that, right? But stars literally bring forth life. And Sabrina's power and legacy are eternal, right? She helped create the SyFy Sistas, and all it stands for, everything it says, everything it does, part of the reason I'm sitting here, having the fortune to speak to you all, is because of Sabrina, because of of everything that she started in part with the SyFy sisters and that legacy. Um, so even though she's not here, it doesn't mean that she's no longer with us. Just like those stars that are out there, she's here with us all the time. And we will always love and remember and cherish our sister. Thank you.